In The Sopranos, we follow the life of New Jersey mafia boss Tony Soprano and the people around him, one of whom is his nephew Christopher Moltisanti, the deuteragonist of the series and almost certainly the most complex character in the show, Tony Soprano aside. Chris is so three-dimensional and fully realised, it is difficult to sum him up in a few words. Often regarded as immature, erratic and unable to see things from the bigger picture, Chris is groomed by his uncle to lead the Sopranos family into the 21st century. But he constantly comes up short and disappoints, even if it's small things like talking out of turn or showing up late to meetings. Chris is a constant source of tension for Tony due to his drug addictions, which could possibly make him susceptible to becoming a state witness if caught, and by Tony's own admission, if it was anyone else who had done the things Chris had done in the show, they would have been dead a long time ago. But Chris has his own personal demons, some of them fueled by his relationship with his uncle, the hole left in his life by the death of Dickie Moltisanti, his father, and ambitions he has away from the mafia, like a career in acting or screenwriting. The instability in his life often manifests into violent outbursts towards his girlfriend Adriana, who he genuinely loves and who genuinely loves him, but as anyone who's seen The Sopranos knows, they hardly had a wholesome and tranquil relationship. Adriana, who has been reluctantly providing information to the feds under threat, is given an ultimatum by them in season 5 to bring Christopher into the fold, meaning she has to tell him the truth, which she does end up doing so. After a quick, friendly strangulation attempt, Chris calms down and opens up to the idea of going into the witness protection program, starting life over, beginning his memoirs. He goes out for cigarettes and very soon Adriana receives a call from Tony that Chris has tried to kill himself, and he is sending Silvio to pick her up to go to the hospital. Of course, the entire thing is a setup, and Adriana is picked up and murdered for her betrayal, meaning she was of course sold out by Chris. Chris is shook by the entire ordeal, never fully recovering even when he's married to another woman, and a flashback scene in season 6 shows the emotionally charged scene where he comes clean to Tony about what Adriana has done. Now, just after Chris leaves when Adriana comes clean, there is a curious scene where he sees the life he will potentially live if he goes and starts again with Adriana. From the little we see of the family, we can get a feel of them. Trashy in Chris's eyes, a run-down looking man who looks done with it, resigned to his life. Not the richest family in the world, a beat-up car, his nagging wife never stopping to take a breath, his children alternatively happy and carefree. Perhaps Christopher was going to flip on Tony. The Sopranos always flirted with this idea right up until Chris's second last episode, where he talks about flipping with JT Dolan. In fact, there's a fan theory that in his final scene he was wearing a wire, which I've discussed in another video. But it's excruciating to think how close Adriana and Christopher were to escaping the life if Chris did in fact genuinely agree to flip. But then he sees this family. He sees his future if he goes into witness protection. The life of a working man, an average nobody, the life of a schnook who has to swap spaghetti with Mariana sauce, with egg noodle and ketchup. It's all written in Chris's face that this is not the life for him. He would never last, even Henry Hill didn't. After the events of Goodfellas, he was quickly up to no good with drugs and whatnot, and was eventually thrown out of the witness protection program. I'll say one thing though, this broken down guy taking care of his family, putting his happiness to a side for the well-being and contentment of his children, he is more of a man than Chris could ever be. One thing The Sopranos shows us is that these mobsters struggle to leave the life. The materialism, the instant gratification, the fast tracking to money and power is too alluring to give up and replace with a life of clocking in at 7 in the morning on a Monday for a 40-hour working week. The parade float, Vito, couldn't even handle a morning as a handyman before giving up and driving back to Jersey. Chris couldn't even handle waiting in line at the bakery in season 1. And it's sad, sickening, to know that in these crucial moments, it was this that swayed Chris's decision. The love of the life that robbed Adriana and Chris of a happy ending, that overpowered his love for Adriana. Or an ending where they're alive at least. He chose a comfortable lifestyle and the price was Adriana's life. Even in the beginning of the scene, he's touching his car, almost stroking it affectionately. A completely normal thing for a person who's got 100 different thoughts in his head, but it may have his love for the life. It's also worth noting that there's a close-up of the children looking joyous and carefree. The best thing about this image It's an alternative possibility that Chris was looking at this family longingly. Sure, they may have been beaten down by life, but they had what Chris didn't have: a family, a mother with her child in her arms, a father taking care of his family, unlike Christopher's, who, according to his mother, was always either out or in jail before he was killed. But this would have made Chris even more adamant to give up Adriana, as he always wanted kids and she couldn't have them. So the one good thing that could come out of running away with her wasn't possible because, as he says in one of the cruelest lines of the show, she was damaged goods. So this was an image, whether he wanted it or not, that he could never have. The children is probably the main takeaway, hence the close-up. These men took an oath. They know there is no escaping the life. As Tony says at one point, the only realistic end they have is prison or death. The hope, the silver lining, aside from all the luxuries they consume before they get to that end, is that their children grow up successfully. But Chris would never be able to do that with Aid because both her uteruses get taken out. In a cynical way, Chris's decision to choose Tony over Aid was an informed one. I don't think any of us can say for sure if Chris made his mind up before he left the apartment. Maybe he did really need a smoke and to clear his head, or maybe he knew from the moment she told him that she'd have to go and he always planned to go straight to Tony. But surely seeing the family sealed Adriana's fate either way. It makes you wonder if Chris hadn't seen the family, whether he still would have given up Aid and gone to Tony. Maybe even he didn't know, as he was shell-shocked and seeing the family put things into perspective, and he had this moment of realization. Let's not forget, Chris has never tasted the regularness of life, something by his own admission he can't seem to handle. He thinks he's had it tough, that he's come up the hard way after being dealt a bad hand, but the reality is that his rise is so drenched in nepotism and favoritism from Tony, that from the inside looking out, Christopher couldn't see it, but others like Silvio and Patsy recognized it. Who else could have survived taking shots at Tony's car and threatening his life? Heck, for all we know, as we don't exactly know when the flashback scene occurred, the station scene may have taken place after Chris meets with Tony, after he has already told him, and Adriana's death is being prepared, so perhaps he feels validated, seeing the quote-unquote loser family and thinking to himself that he made the right choice. It could also just be a momentary escape, pondering, imagining if he had an alternative life as a normal family man, where his problems didn't involve him fearing being murdered, where the biggest problems was the bills, the kids getting to school on time, things like that. But for Chris, his hopes and dreams of becoming a male model or screenwriter were just that, and his actual valuation of himself and sense of belonging and purpose was within the context of Tony's glorified crew. Without that, who is he? Where's his arc, dear viewer? A kind of macro overarching takeaway from this scene is a showcase of just how weak and selfish Christopher is. He chooses the family over having a real family. He chooses the life of materialism over the love of Adriana, who has stuck by him after all the shit he has put her through. And just like that, he walks out on her and goes running like a bitch to Tony. And he's not even man enough to do the deed himself. He has to have it done for him. You know, I think Chris is so damn indecisive that, much like how you can tell there's an element of him that regrets having Adriana killed, even if he went with her and spent his days with egg noodle and ketchup, he'd have regretted that as well. It was just a bad situation all around and he wasn't equipped mentally to deal with it. But there's loads of little moments in season 6 where you can tell he thinks he made the wrong decision. I wonder if he saw Adriana's face flash before his eyes as Tony pinched his natural canopy of a nose and put him to sleep. Speaking of indecisive, what if it was a happy upper-class family that Chris saw instead of a poorer one? Would that have affected his decision? Would it have swayed him to give it a go with Adriana? And what does it say about Christopher that he makes the most important decision of his life based on seeing a Nicolas Cage lookalike come out of a store in a 10-second scene? And you know what's funny? The guy may have been tired, but if Chris went to them and asked the couple if they were happy, for all he knows, they may have said they are happy, that they wouldn't swap their life and their children for anything, especially Chris's life. Maybe it was envy that Chris was looking at the family with. If you want my opinion, I think he knew what had to be done very shortly after Aid told him the truth, and he had to work his way to accepting that reality. Seeing the family drove the point home, but also allowed Chris to ponder on what might have been if things were different, if he wasn't in the mob, if Aid could have kids, etc., etc. So what do you make of this scene? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, and thanks for watching.